Hello and good morning, friends. Happy 4th of July. I hope you all are getting ready to have a good barbecue and a cookout, just like I am. Did a little quick septic inspection this morning and finally had a chance to mow the lawn, but we're excited to cook out. I hope you are as well. But today I want to talk to you about something very important, right? And that is going to be well yields. Now, this particular client, we had them quite a while back, but they were hesitant about testing their well. Now, whenever you're buying a home that comes on well and septic, it's always a good idea to make sure that you test the quality of the water, test the septic, as well as to test the quantity of water that well can produce, right? Every well's a little bit different. It just kind of depends on who drilled it, how it was drilled, all that good stuff, right? So this particular purchaser was kind of the mindset that, I don't really need to worry about doing a well yield. They've had 6 people living here. The house is 60 years old. Everything should be in pretty good shape, right? Well, let's figure out why and what happened. So this home, again, had been occupied for a while, 6 people born and raised, but the problem is for the last few years, it's only been 2 old people living on the property. Now, older people generally don't use as much water, so they generally end up, not noticing any well issues or decline in the quality or the volume of the water that your well produces. For these particular buyers, though, their agent eventually convinced them to go ahead and test the well. So we grabbed the water samples, took a look, see what's going on. As I'm looking at the wellhead itself, I noticed that it's in a large bush. Now, mistake number 1 is putting a large bush around your well. You might be saying, well, I want to hide it. I don't want to have that pipe sticking up in the air, yada, yada, yada. I get it. I understand. However, if you start putting a bush around your well, you're going to get pollen, bugs, grass, leaves from the plant, depending on the type of plant that it is, and potentially roots, depending on how big that plant gets, right? So this particular plant was one of the leafy varieties, right? Nothing super crazy, but pop open the bush, take a look, see that we got our well in there. Go over to the well, give the lid a shake, and off comes the lid. And when that lid comes off, you want to know what I found underneath of there? Good old wasp nest. Yes, sir. That well has a wasp nest chilling on the inside of it. Now, you might be saying, well, wasps aren't that big of an issue, but they are, right? And the problem is that if they're in your well, they're going to be building, they're going to be eating, they're going to be dying, they're going to be using their lavatories, right? And so they're going to get into your well and cause bacteria contamination. Now, the issue with this is that getting a wasp nest out of a well kind of sucks, right? You can't spray it, you can't do anything, you just kind of have to let them work their way out and then slowly, 1 scoop at a time, get rid of that nest. Because if you spray, guess what you're drinking? All that wasp spray, and I don't think you're allowed to be drinking any of that. So we've already got an issue with the quality of the water just because we've already found a wasp nest in there. The odds of that well being good and secure, slim to none, right? So now we move on to the next phase of the test. We're going to see, does mechanically everything function the way that it's supposed to function? And at this point, this is where we run into our first red flag. So we get there and the plumbing's all over the place. Somebody's like jury-rigged this thing to hell and back. Like, it is all over the place. The issue with this is that they did not correctly connect to the tank, and they did not have a proper pressure relief valve, a proper hose bib, didn't have it raised off the floor. There were a lot of things wrong with this particular pressure tank. The biggest of all is that it was short cycling. Now you might be asking, well, what does short cycling mean? So when the pressure switch, the little gray box on the well tank, kicks on, you'll hear an audible click sound. Perfectly normal. That's the way that it's supposed to be, right? Now, you should, if the math was done correctly and everybody who installed it did their job, you should get a 60-second cycle between first click, second click, right? If it's shorter than that, technically it's considered a short cycle. Now, most of the people in our area, and the way that I was taught, generally once you're below 30 seconds to cycle, now you got to start being concerned. If you're 30 seconds and above, usually you're okay, right? And the concern with this is the pressure tank's going to supply pressure to the home, but its auxiliary function is to allow the pump run time. The longer the pump runs, the more efficiently it runs. What burns a well pump up is the on-off. So if you have a 15 seconds short cycle, you're on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off all the time on your pump, which is going to cause excessive wear and tear, and eventually that pump's going to fail. The most common cause for short cycling is a ruptured bladder. So how you check for that is you go up to the Schrader valve, the little tire valve that's on the top of the tank, press it, right? If water comes out, boom, now you know it's waterlogged. Another way you can test it is to drain the thing and give it a shake. You can also tap on it, knock on it. It should ring hollow, right? If it's making like a dull thumping sound, more than likely, that bladder's gone. You can't fix a bladder that's ruptured in a pressure tank. Once that bladder's gone, it's time to replace that tank and move on to the next system. So we've already got that issue. We've got a short cycle. So we're already off to striking out basically on everything right now. So we've got issues with the wellhead itself. We've got issues with bugs in the well. We've got issues with the quality. We've got issues with the mechanics inside of the home. So the next step is to figure out, can this well actually produce any water, right? All those other things you can fix that. It's just a matter of time and money. So we start the test. In our area, there's two different ways to do a well yield. First way is to pull the existing pump out of the hole, stick your pump in and pump directly from the well and just discharge it. You have to discharge it at least 50 feet away and downhill from the well. The second way that the counties say that you can do a well yield is to hook up to the pressure tank at the distribution point, right? So what does that mean? In the well, right, you're gonna have your downward column. You're gonna have your pump that shoots the water up, and in our area, we use these things called pitless adapters, so that way we don't have to worry about frost proofing anything else. It's basically below the frost line, water's not gonna freeze, you don't have to worry about your pipes. So it'll go up from the pump to the pitless, into the supply line to the house. From there, generally, the way that our area is built, you're gonna have a large blue tank called the pressure tank, directly in line with that pipe. And so what'll happen is the water will come into the house, it'll fill that pressure tank, and then that pressure tank will push the water to the rest of the home. So in our area, by code, you're required to have a hose bib and a pressure relief valve at that pressure tank, right? So we already know we're missing the pressure relief valve, but we can work with the hose bib. So we hook up our hose bib, and the reason you want to do that is because then you get less potential restriction points, and so you can get the highest volume of water as possible. So in our area, you must start the yield 8.0 gallons per minute or higher in order to get an accurate reading. Now, you might be saying, well, I could just hook up to an outside hose bib. No, you can't. And the reason why is that the pipe coming into the home, at least in our area, is generally 1 inch. At a hose bib, generally you'll have ½ inch. Half-inch piping is going to be a smaller pipe, so you will get a higher pressure, but you will get a lower flow. When you're trying to figure out the yield of the well, you don't worry about the pressure as much as you worry about the flow rate of the water, right? And the reason why is if I choke back the water discharge to 1 gallon per minute, and the well's 10 gallons per minute, I'm not actually testing it, right? The purpose of the well yield is to drain the reserve, which is how much water is just stagnant in the column, even though it's not actually stagnant. The water is still constantly moving, but it's however much water is just actively there whenever you start, right? You want to drain that down, and then eventually you'll hit your equilibrium, right? The equilibrium is your yield. So let's just say, for example, that we start at 10 gallons a minute, and 15 minutes later, it's 9.5. Another 15 minutes later, now it's 9, and then so on and so forth, right? Eventually, might take an hour, might take 2 hours, but eventually it'll plateau. So you'll always see the well yield starts high, falls down, plateau. The plateau is your yield. In our area, 1 gallon per minute is the requirement. So we've already got 2 ways to test for this. The way that we're testing for is the auxiliary way, and we're going through the pressure tank. So we start off at 9 gallons a minute, right? We're running full bore, no issues. 20 minutes goes by, water stops, right? So what that means is the water level in the well has hit the pump intake, and so now you've got a little bit of air mixing there, and so you're not getting the water up out of the hole. So what do? So we turn off the power to the pump, start a stopwatch, and then we start doing what we call a dump and fill. Basically, this is where we have the pump no longer pumping, we have the stopwatch going, and we're gonna let it rest for an arbitrary amount of time. So in this particular circumstance, let it rest for 10 minutes. You turn the pump back on, and then we would fill the buckets until the water stopped. The stopwatch is still going the entire time while this is happening. And the reason why is I'm trying to calculate how much water got into that well during this period. So for sake of argument, let's just round up to easy numbers, right? So in 10 minutes of total relaxed time, the well produced 10 gallons a minute. 10 gallons total. That would mean for 1 minute, it would produce 1 gallon. And that would basically be allowing you to check your math. Now, for this particular well, we did our first test, and I got 0.3 gallons per minute. that is next to no water. Basically, you want to visualize this, go to your kitchen sink right now, cockeye it just a touch, it's like next to nothing, right? So next step is to verify that it's not mechanical. So how you do that is you wait again, start the stopwatch, but now you wait even longer time or a shorter time. You just pick a different time. And so for this sake of argument, we'll just say that we waited 20 minutes, right? You wait 20 minutes and you do the test again. And the reason why you want to make a difference in the time is so that we can check to see if it's mechanical. If it's mechanical, what'll happen is you'll get the same volume of water at different times, meaning you'll get different yields, which is a lot easier to fix than having to drill a new well. So we did this test 3 more times, 3 different waiting periods. And again, we came down to determine that it was 0.3 gallons per minute. So at this point, now the buyers are freaking out because they had originally wanted to skip all of this stuff, right? And now that we're testing for it, which is good, they're figuring out that this is getting more and more and more expensive. And generally, whenever it comes down to this, it's about what do you want to do, and also what are you legally allowed to do. Before I go any further, though, I'm very curious. If you've ever had a low yield in your well, or if you've had any kind of issues with your well, leave a comment below. Tell me your story. Like, what happened to you? Did you ever have your well tested before you moved in? Did you have any problems that popped up before, after, or during the purchasing process? Leave a comment. I'm very curious. So, moving forward, we figured out the yield. We figured out what was going on. We have all of our list of issues with this well. So now we get to play the fun game of what do you do next? The well with the wasp nest, the mechanical stuff, that's all straightforward. You just replace it, you clean it out, you're good to go. But the tricky part is going to be dealing with the 0.3 gallon per minute well. So generally there's a couple different ways that you can address this, right? So the first way is going to be to actually have storage. Storage tanks are generally going to be used in 300 to 600 gallon range, right? So there's big giant white boxes essentially. And what'll happen is the well pump will pump a little bit of water at a time. It'll fill those storage tanks up, and you're having a little pump right next to those storage tanks that'll reprime it and send it throughout the house. The issue with that style is that it doesn't really solve the root cause of your issue. So our root cause of our issue is that this well is not productive. So by putting storage tanks, yes, that would buy you some time, but it doesn't actually fix the underlying issue. So the second option is hydrofracking. Now, I don't do hydrofracking, but I've only ever really seen it done by other people who have had success at 0.8 or higher gallons per minute. I've not seen it ever work for anything that has basically almost no water in it. And hydrofracking, for simple terms, is basically like power washing your well, right? They use it in the oil industry to kind of crack up the rocks in the earth to get the oil to flow. We also use it in water. It's just going to be significantly less pressure, right? So this well's too low. Don't necessarily think that's going to work. And it's kind of one of those costs to where you could do it, but if it doesn't work, you're out that money, and now you got to go to the most dramatic spot. The most dramatic response to this is to drill a new well, all right? So in this particular circumstance, that's probably what they're going to end up having to do. Drilling a new well is time-consuming and expensive. In our area, it can be anywhere from $30 to $40 per foot, and you pay for the hole. You don't pay for productivity, right? So if you drill a 100-foot hole, well, you're $3,000 down the tube, and now you got to start over, right? So it can get costly pretty quick. So generally in our area, you want to budget between $10,000 and $15,000 to drill a new well, and it's gonna be loud. It'll be a 2 or 3 day project to get that done. So in this particular circumstance, I think that they're going down the route of drilling a new well. But this is a very important thing for anybody who's thinking about purchasing a house or hasn't decided what kind of test they want to do yet. You need to make sure that you test the volume of the water as well as the quality of the water, right? Because you can have really, really clean, good drinking water, but if you don't have much of it, you're going to run into some problems. You might also have a ton of water that you can't drink, right? So all that said, make sure you get your stuff tested. It's also a good idea every few years, maybe every 10, 15 years, you have somebody check and test the yield of your well to see, is your well still productive? Check the mechanics, check the pressure tank, all that stuff, right? It's a good idea to have everything checked every now and again. There is some minor maintenance that homeowners can do, and the biggest thing you can do as a homeowner is keep the pressure tank full of air, right? It should always be 2 psi below the cut-on. Obviously, you have to check it when there's no water in the pressure tank, otherwise you'll get a false reading. But if you do that every year or two, just like when you're changing the filters on your furnace, you'll get much longer lifespan out of those systems, and you don't have to replace them as much. So I hope this was useful. If you enjoyed this commentary and this information, hit that like button, hit subscribe. I've got more videos posted every day on the world of well and septic. Leave those comments below. Tell me all about your story. I'm very curious. Till next time, guys.